What was once a group of vaqueros showcasing the skill and athleticism of their horses evolved into one of the most elite disciplines in equestrian sport. Ironically, it's also the shortest lived division of the FEI. Today, we're taking a spin into reining. The year is 1966. A group of enthusiasts in the United States forms the National Reining Horse Association. Throughout the decades, the discipline explodes, even going international. American stock breeds dominate the scene. In the year 2000, reining is formally recognized by the Fédération Équestre Internationale, otherwise known as the FEI. It's poised to become the first Western discipline accepted as an Olympic sport. The partnership only lasted about 2 decades, officially ending in 2021. Reining's popularity continued to grow, with shows like Yellowstone shining a spotlight and people throwing endless money at it. The sport shows no sign of slowing down, yet it makes you wonder, how bad did reining have to be to get kicked out of the FEI? As it turns out, that question opens a lot of doors most people in the reining industry would rather keep shut. What I started as an analysis of training and judging trends throughout the past 2 decades turned into something much bigger, something systemic. At the heart of it all were drugs, secrecy, and the quiet normalization of something that should have never been accepted in the first place. The FEI worked in close relationship with the NRHA and AQHA from the beginning. The goal? To grow the sport worldwide. Within 12 years' time, the FEI jumped from hosting just 5 competitions to 115. At first glance, reining seemed like a perfect fit for the FEI. It was flashy and precise. It required great skill, but beneath the spins and sliding stops, tension was brewing. Horse welfare was a major sticking point. The FEI enforces strict rules. Horses must be 7 years of age at minimum to compete internationally. In reining, it's very common to see 3 and 4-year-olds competing at the top of the sport in the most prestigious events, winning absolute bukus of cash. Understandably, the FEI saw young horses completing such intense maneuvers as a serious concern. So, in 2014, the FEI formalized the relationship by signing a cooperation agreement with both the NRHA and AQHA. The agreement in question covered areas like horse welfare, FEI rules and regulations, FEI clean sport, stewarding, education, and FEI recognition. The FEI would have jurisdiction over reining competitions for horses aged 7 years and older. For horses 6 and younger, the AQHA and NRHA managed those competitions. But the buck didn't stop there. There were medication and drug testing policies. The NRHA allowed certain sedatives, like romifidine, minutes before a run. The FEI has a zero-tolerance policy for that. Ultimately, the FEI prized fairness and safety for horse and rider. Governance conflicts made matters worse. The NRHA largely self-regulated drug testing and penalties, while the FEI demanded full transparency, consistency, and international standards. Where the NRHA put the sport first, the FEI put the horse first. And that's where differences ultimately became irreconcilable. As a result, the FEI ceased recognizing competitions in 2018 and formally dissolved the discipline from its recognition entirely in 2021. Now let's talk about the biggest reason the NRHA butted heads with the FEI: drugs. You might be thinking, what drug policies could the NRHA have that are so gosh darn controversial? The FEI has a zero-tolerance policy for medication and competition. Point blank, period, end of story. If your horse tests positive for anything stronger than a sugar cube, you're in trouble. The NRHA? Not so much. Their handbook has an entire section dedicated to what you can give a horse before they walk into the pen and the timeframes in which the drugs can be administered before competition. Here's the table directly from the NRHA's policies. Feel free to pause and read. The elephant in the room is romifidine. Now, romifidine is also known as Sedavet, which is, as the name implies, a veterinary sedative. It's used for minor procedures from handling to dental work and minor surgical. The NRHA at this point in time has received many letters from veterinarians urging them to revisit their drug policies given the nature of this sedative. Here's a letter from one anonymous veterinarian. And in September of 2022, the American Association of Equine Practitioners, an organization composed of over 9,000 veterinarians, sent a letter to Rick Clark, then president of the NRHA. Much research has been conducted on horses receiving romifidine. These studies have demonstrated that at 30 minutes post-administration, 80% of horses still show signs of mild to moderate sedation, and signs of lameness are significantly decreased from a pre-administration baseline evaluation. Ataxia may still be present up to an hour after administration, and diminished response to painful stimuli and other signs of sedation may persist for up to 2 hours in some horses. Taken together, allowing a horse to enter a show ring 30 minutes post-administration of romifidine presents a safety and welfare risk to both horse and rider, including masking lameness that could become worse when riding or results in the horse tripping and injuring itself and the rider. The analgesic effect of this drug, furthermore, can be considered performance enhancing and an affront to the spirit of fair competition. So basically, in layman's terms, that means that 30 minutes prior to walking into a show ring, a horse can be sedated and be under the effects of a sedative that also acts as a painkiller. Now, the NRHA does have a medical form you can fill out, but we have to keep in mind that the NRHA prefers self-governance, meaning that everything is very insular and very hush-hush. So long as your veterinarian signs a piece of paper saying your horse needs a medication, you're fine and free to go. But let's say someone bypasses official routes. Well, they'll get caught by drug testing, right? Not likely. The NRHA is absolutely substandard when it comes to testing, which is odd considering how many millions of dollars they all seem to be swimming in. Testing with the NRHA is random. Now, I'm going to give you some context. The AQHA spends $1 million annually on drug testing. In 2021, the NRHA reportedly spent $158,000. Much like the Wizard of Oz, the NRHA seems to enjoy operating behind a curtain. While they did somewhat stiffen their policies on getting caught doping incorrectly, no one's really sure if it's had any effect at all because their medication committee is anonymous. It's bizarre because if you look at their sister organizations like the Cutting Horse, the Cow Horse, even the Pro Rodeo, the members of these boards are all publicly known. And per the NRHA, if one of their members wants to have a hearing about their medications violation, they can request a hearing with a panel. The hearing panel is an anonymous group of individuals who will come together if a member requests to plead their medications violation case. They are comprised of 2 veterinarians, 2 NRHA professionals, and a member of the NRHA Stewards Committee. Now, that all sounds good and well, but there is a flaw in the system. In 2022, then President Rick Clark sent out an open letter. It is also important to understand that the industry was totally split on this from the beginning, from the extreme of those who wanted no medications policy at all, to those who wanted zero tolerance. We did not have the support to go full no allowance for romifidine at this time. It is as simple as that. We were faced with some unfortunate but very likely scenarios if we did not get the support we needed to enact some changes. In other words, even knowing what was best for the horses, leadership caved to industry pressure. Ultimately, what this all means is that the decision to use drugs is left to owner, exhibitor, and veterinarian. These are the alleged votes, per another independent media source, of people who voted yes to keeping romifidine. Those people are highlighted in green. Remember this guy specifically. His name is Mark Blake. Bottom line, the NRHA admits that even knowing what's best for the horses, the industry pressure and divided opinions forced them to allow sedatives like romifidine. This isn't a hypothetical. This is their leadership openly saying compromise took priority over horse welfare. They're basically saying, we know what's right, but we can't afford to lose support from the people doing the wrong thing. Except those little steps that Clark spoke of are horses being drugged just to make it through a class. And this isn't coming from outsiders or critics. This is straight from their own leadership. Leadership that is involved with the industry and ultimately benefits from all of the things going on. When there is such a clear conflict of interest, it becomes obvious that this is apathy dressed in diplomacy. For those who want to read it for yourselves, I've linked the full letter in the description below. And if that ever happens to quietly disappear, I've also preserved it in the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. It doesn't take a genius to see the problem here. If a horse needs a cocktail of painkillers, relaxers, steroids, and a sedative just to get through a run, that's not really a healthy horse being shown off for its athleticism. That's a horse being medicated to mask the damage. And that's exactly why the FEI walked away. And they weren't the only ones. In 2022, yet another letter found itself in the mailbox of the NRHA, and this time it was from the United States Equestrian Federation. USEF sent the NRHA a 90-day notice stating that they would no longer provide testing services to the NRHA given their allowance for substances, citing it as a philosophical difference. USEF did state that if the NRHA were to align with USEF's anti-doping policy, that they'd happily provide services again. So you remember this guy, right? Well, in 2023, he becomes the president of the NRHA and sends out this letter to members. As I begin my presidency, one of my top priorities was to be as transparent as possible with the membership and to always keep an open dialogue. With that being said, as we get closer to the implementation of our updated animal welfare and medications policy this June, I wanted to ensure our members that we are aware of two developments that occurred after the policy's August approval. First, the American Association of Equine Practitioners sent a letter that was later publicly shared expressing their concern over the permittance of romifidine. They have also since provided us with research to support their objections. Secondly, the United States Equestrian Federation, whom we've shared a long-standing relationship with, formally notified us that they could no longer partner with us to conduct our medications testing at NRHA-approved events due to our allowance of romifidine in competition. The significance of these decisions and communication pieces has weighed heavily on me, and I continue to take them very seriously. It basically states how he has been shaken to his core by the correspondence he's seen from the AAEP and USEF, among others, and his response to that is to come up with an animal welfare task force. But we're not just going to take his word for it when he says he's concerned about animal welfare. We're not even going to take my word for it. We're going to look at the numbers published by the NRHA themselves. In 2020, peak COVID, the NRHA tested 5 events. That makes sense. Then the number spikes dramatically, only to drop again after Blake takes over to levels lower than during lockdown. By 2024, things barely improved. More events were tested, but fewer days and horses were covered. And the rate of positives for forbidden substances was higher than any other year. Over the past 4 years, 59 events were tested and 1,074 tests were administered. Of those, 108 came back positive. That is a 10.06 rate. In other words, if we are to take these statistics into consideration, over 1 in 10 horses were competing under the influence of drugs. For reference, horse racing sees a positive rate of about 0.43% out of nearly 250,000 tests. So here's the wild part. Even after the FEI basically told Reining thanks but no thanks, the sport hasn't slowed down. In fact, it's booming in some circles. Shows like Yellowstone have turned casual viewers into Reining fans almost overnight. People are suddenly throwing endless dollars at futurities, derbies, and private training programs like it's a luxury sport. Young riders are idolizing top pros, horses are selling for hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars, and the spectacle of sliding stops and spinning horses is a real Hollywood Western meets sport vibe that the public just can't get enough of. Meanwhile, at the international level, the FEI is like, yeah, thanks, but we still don't trust that you're putting the horses first. The rules, the medications, the way that young horses are pushed, none of that aligns with what the FEI wants in an Olympic sport. So you end up with this really crazy dichotomy. Domestically, reining is elite, showy, and incredibly profitable. And internationally, the FEI wants nothing to do with it because of the drugs, the governance, and the treatment of young horses. And honestly, that's what makes reining so fascinating to study right now. You've got a sport that is wildly popular, visually spectacular, and culturally influential, but simultaneously rejected by the very organization that governs every other top level horse sport. It's like watching a blockbuster movie that everyone loves, but it just can't win an Oscar. And if you look at the way that the sport is evolving, there are some concerning trends. Reining horses' headsets are getting lower and lower, with horses carrying themselves in ways that might look impressive but put strain on necks and backs over time. Spins are getting faster and faster, and in some cases, just downright sloppy. More flash than precision as riders chase higher scores for technical difficulty. Horses are so sensitive to spur touch now that getting them to lope off from a standstill without them taking a sideways step can be a struggle. But what is soundness and longevity when you can chase spectacle and high scores? And here's the tragic part. Reining could have been a fundamental change that Western horses desperately need. With all of that structure, organization, and growing international attention, they could have pioneered a path toward longer lasting, sounder horses, a sport that valued athleticism and welfare. Instead, the focus became quick returns and cash in hand. Futurities, high dollar prizes, and top end sales took priority over steady, sustainable growth. Young horses were pushed too hard, painkillers and sedatives became standard, and the athleticism on display often relied on as much drugs as skill. In short, the sport chose profits over progress, and that choice is still haunting it today. And I think it's going to get a lot worse. I think headsets are going to get lower. I think we're going to see more horses falling than not, and because of the money and the pressure on performance, young horses are going to continue to break down. I don't think it'll be too much longer before we start seeing catastrophic injuries taking place in the arena. Give it a couple of decades, maybe I'll be wrong, and I hope that I am, but given that a former NRHA president spoke on it himself, a lot of reining horses eliminate themselves early on, even if they have the ability and the try, because they just can't hold up. Timothy Bartlett, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, former NRHA president, NRHA judge. Dr. Grant Miller, another veterinarian, also chimes in. We have established that repetitive trauma on the joint from athletic performance can cause degenerative changes to the cartilage and bones. Racehorses and futurity quarter horses that train heavily in the juvenile stage of their lives often show early signs of hock-related pain. Reiners commonly have hock issues. If we look at reining over the past 2 decades, a clear pattern emerges. A slow but steady shift into how horses are trained and shown. Back in 2007 to 2010, the picture was very different. Horses were balanced, moving off of their hindquarters with level heads and relaxed, responsive frames. Spins were precise, rollbacks were controlled, and transitions were clean. It was about athleticism, partnership, and clarity. You could watch a horse work and immediately understand what was being asked. The movement was honest, purposeful, safe. By the early 2010s, subtle changes start to creep in. Headsets began dropping more between maneuvers, and there was more drape in the reins. Nothing extreme yet, but it was clear that the horses were being asked for a slightly more exaggerated position. Trainers were starting to prioritize a look, a lower headset, a flashier roll, even if the horse's natural balance wasn't quite as perfect. Around 2015 and 2016, the trend just intensified. Horses were being drilled to carry their heads consistently low, even when just walking or transitioning. Spins sped up, rollbacks became a little sloppy, and emphasis on visual style started to outweigh the precision. The low head, flashy back look was being reinforced at home, so that by the time horses hit the show pin, the aesthetic was expected almost automatically. Performance was becoming more about spectacle than soundness. And then by 2019 to 2023, this is solidified into a standard. Headsets routinely dipped below the top line, corrections were common, keeping the horse in that position through maneuvers and transitions. Horses moved fast, spins were flashy, and the focus was now clearly on creating a striking picture for judges, sometimes at the expense of balance. Even in 2025, at the very top levels of the competition, the pattern continues. Horses consistently carry their heads low, spins are visually impressive but sometimes uneven, and the training culture now rewards a drilled aesthetic over a natural movement. The athleticism is still there, obviously, but it comes paired with practices that risk long term soundness and welfare. So when you step back and look at the big picture, the story is clear. From the mid 2000s and well before that to today, Reining has drifted from its roots of honest, balanced athletic performance into a style increasingly dominated by drilled postures, exaggerated headsets, and performance driven spectacle. The horses are still athletes, but the way that they've been trained and shown has evolved in ways that make you wonder how long they can sustain it. So I think that's partly what has happened to Reining, because constantly chasing that little bit extra, as you have to do in competitions that have either loose standards and rules or judges who won't enforce those standards and rules, or the associations won't boot judges who won't enforce standards and rules, is that you get Western pleasure, modern dressage, modern reining. It all just falls apart from what it was originally meant to be. But you don't have to take my word for it. There's someone else who might just agree. I was asked the other day at an NRHA event by one of the other $1 million riders if I'd retired. No. But then I wondered what made him think I had. Maybe it's because I haven't shown at a major event in a couple of years. Maybe it's because after 40 years of showing horses competitively, I don't necessarily feel the burning desire inside that makes me do whatever it takes to be sure that I have a good one. Maybe it's because I've developed a deeper, more important connection with horses that is far more valuable than another buckle. Maybe it takes me longer. Maybe it always should have. Maybe it's because I am no longer willing to do the things I used to and the things I've seen in order to make a horse do what it takes. Maybe I'm not interested until I find a better way. Maybe I'm at home experimenting with a better way. Maybe I think we should take longer, wait on horses, and create something that is broke, sound, and happy for years. Maybe I'm not as selfish as I used to be. Maybe I've decided it's more about the horse and what it wants rather than what I need it to be. I'm training better than I ever have, and I'm helping so many more people. Don't get caught thinking I forgot how to train a horse to stop, circle, and spin, because someday you might get caught with your pants down. If the right amazing horse that could win it all goes through my barn again, don't underestimate me. I will come and take your money like I have before, but I'll do it the right way. No, I haven't retired. I've evolved. $1 million rider, 17-time world champion, Craig Johnson. The clips I'm about to show you are from the National Ring Cow Horse Association competitions, the NRCHA events where horses still perform functional duties in this westernized 3-day event. These are their reining horses. I don't think I have to point out the difference. Because this is what reining was always meant to be. Collected, forward, sound, a partnership built on feel, not force. These horses could still go to work after this run, and that's the point. The NRCHA has also taken drugging very seriously, and penalties are rightfully severe and immediate. Reining could have been the fundamental change that Western horses needed. The structure, the spotlight, the money, it all could have been used to build a sport that valued longevity, soundness, and true athleticism. Instead, it went the other way. Quick returns over steady growth, flash over foundation, painkillers, pressure, and precocity over patience. But the blueprint for what should have been is still out there, alive and well. It's just not under the banner of the NRHA. Keep your horses balanced, your hands light, and your perspectives open. Till next time.